The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. Therefore, guard accordingly and take care that you entertain no notions unsuitable to virtue and reasonable nature. Marcus Aurelius. Hello and welcome to the second episode of Mindset Forge. I'm your host, Laurent Lohel. Let's get to it. Marcus Aurelius, the immortal Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, lived in the 2nd century, but his thoughts still guide many of us. His sentiments echo those of teachers like the Buddha, who came much before him. And now, another 2000 years later, the same ideas find resurrection in the works of modern researchers. But they are not called the path of liberation, as was the case in Buddhism, nor Stoic philosophy, which was how it was called in the days of Emperor Aurelius. These days, when one considers the same subject, one speaks of mindsets. The word mindset is used to refer to the beliefs and attitudes we hold towards attributes, traits, people, or in other words, our values, culture, and general outlook on life. Most of us don't really consider our thoughts and beliefs systematically. At best, comparing different views and determining which one is more right in the moral sense or more correct, that is, closer to the accepted truth. But it is rare to weigh one's thoughts with the purpose of finding the ones that allow one to best adapt to their situation, the ones that will propel them to their goals and make obstacles vanish before them like desert mirages. The term mindset has come to be most closely associated with the work of Carol Dweck, who described the dichotomy between two mindsets she called growth and fixed mindsets in her book Mindset, A New Psychology of Success, which has sold over 1 million copies. We will go into more detail over her findings in a later podcast, but at this point it suffices to know that people with a growth mindset believe that they can become more intelligent through hard work, while persons with a fixed mindset think they won't change and therefore it is ultimately pointless to try and improve, as there will be no way for him to overcome himself. The theory is also called implicit theory of intelligence, since all it deals with is which view on attaining intelligence one holds. This single difference of belief, whether one can become smarter or not, has been shown to have a great impact on mental well-being, academic success, and reaching one's goals. But other, not as studied and far less understood mindsets can bring much wilder results. The ones with outlier mindsets almost appearing capable of superhuman feats. While such world-class marvels might well serve as one's first inspiration to learn about mindsets and take the first steps of change in themselves, it would hardly be realistic to expect to reach those kinds of results straight away. But, as I will soon detail, just the way you think about certain things influences you in many ways. Some can only be detected and ascertained with a blood test or a functional MRI scan of the brain. With others, you notice the shift yourself, but only after some time, like suddenly waking up from a dream and realizing that something is different. An example of this might be that you realize that the situation that used to cause you anxiety no longer does so, and that in itself brings pleasure, and then it is only a short distance to the cause of distress turning into a source of contentment. Then there are changes that you notice immediately, these more often fueled by earlier, more subtle successes that have reinforced your brain's capability of adapting. So incorporating new beliefs and ways of seeing becomes something that requires less and less work and overcoming. And finally, change that is apparent to others, one they might witness with jealousy or admiration, depending on what mindset they happen to carry around. Even if you don't become as famous and capable of extremes as, for example, Wim Hof or David Goggins, you will still feel like a superhuman compared to your earlier self. In this episode, I will be examining existing research relating to mindsets and similar areas, with the focus on the real benefits that have been reported in studies. I could have listed people notable for their mindsets instead, famous athletes, CEOs, ancient rulers and heroes, and the like, but chose to stick to published studies instead, since they are the most objective. Also, the studies are often quite short in duration and therefore they show it is possible, even ordinary, to get quick results with a change in belief. I will not be claiming that you, or anybody else for that matter, should aim for these results specifically, but my goal is to showcase just how much can be achieved with a change in mindset. After that, whatever your ambition might be will likely seem much more attainable, even unimpressive in comparison. Next, I would like to go through some examples from scientific research where a change in mindset or belief caused a measurable change in some parameter. Hopefully, this way I'll be able to convince even those amongst you with the most healthy doubt that there is something to be gained here, and that simply changing your thinking and attitude can be the first thing towards something great. As we'll later learn, thinking is not just thinking, it is making a change in the brain, at least when done purposefully and frequently enough. Now, this episode may have turned out a lot more medical than I originally intended, but I still hold it will benefit anyone who listens to it and grasps at the message I'm trying to get across. This episode is not only for those with some kind of an illness, and I'm not trying to make you go to a doctor. It is a message meant for anyone looking to improve their lives and themselves, and my plan is to give you tools to improve your own well-being, so you won't develop any condition arising from lifestyle that would require a health professional. Let's begin with established changes in laboratory findings. Isn't it astounding that with a thought or belief one can change the compounds in their blood? A change in mood and motivation, etc. is easy to understand, but that measurable changes occur we don't necessarily notice and usually have no way of controlling. For example, we can flex our bicep consciously, but we cannot will our blood sugar to change. Also, we think, but our beliefs, or more accurately misbeliefs, as was the case in these studies, can alter our blood glucose. In two studies by Chanmo Park, Francesco Pagnini and Ellen Langer, it was shown that in patients with type 2 diabetes, a disease with impaired glucose levels because of insulin insensitivity, blood glucose reacted more to what they believed was true rather than what they actually went through. In another study, the study subjects were divided into 3 groups, all of which played video games for 90 minutes. But some had accurate clocks, while the other 2 groups had clocks that ran at half or double the speed. Those in the slow group had less of a dip in blood sugar, while those in the fast group had their blood glucose drop more than the other 2 groups, and also felt hungrier by the end of their 90 minutes. In their other study, they fed people beverages whose etiquettes claimed their caloric content differed, when in reality all containers held the exact same liquid. Those who believed they had consumed more calories had their blood glucose rise higher, which is surprising since one would have assumed their body would have reacted to the assumed high sugar intake by increasing insulin, which would have lowered blood glucose. But this was not the case. In a review study compounding multiple studies about patients with rheumatoid arthritis, it was found placebo intervention decreased laboratory values called C-reactive protein and sedimentation rate a significant level. Both of these are commonly used markers for inflammation. At this point, I feel the need to add that if you have been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis or any other chronic illness for that matter, do not discontinue your prescribed medication without consulting your doctor first. Better not to do it at all. What the studies suggest instead, it is beneficial to truly believe in the efficiency of the medicine. In another study called Mind Over Milkshakes, it was shown that drinking the same milkshake had different effects on the hormone ghrelin, depending on whether one was led to believe it was high calorie or low calorie, leading to different levels of satiety. Might one be able to bring more satiety simply by thinking he was eating like a king? I don't know whether this has been studied, but have found myself being a lot more content with my meal simply by thinking it a luxurious treat, even when it was porridge or a supermarket protein pudding. In a study from 2003, it was shown that verbal conditioning, that is, telling people a placebo injection will have an effect on their growth hormone, alone did not affect the amount of growth hormone, but if the subject received growth hormone inducing substance on earlier days and were then given a placebo substance, saline in this case, the hormones were altered. What this study seems to show is that if your body experiences some priming change in hormones via effective chemicals, that change can be later achieved even with placebo, that is, inactive compounds, with belief alone. At this point I should mention that most all studies of this type usually have their subjects deceived in some way, so studies with conscious change in mindset are more rare. Of course, you, listener, most likely cannot get someone to handle your meals and the like while constantly lying to you about them. As such, the best you can do is eliminate the negative presuppositions you might have and replace them with more positive expectations. That is, change your mindset regarding this specific thing. After all, it is all subjective, so one opinion is rarely more correct than the other. I did mention changes visible in a functional magnetic resonance imaging scan, so here's a few. A study published in a magazine called Appetite. They primed their subjects with different mindsets to approach planning their meal with. One group chose freely, while others selected for pleasure or health. Not only did their portion sizes change, the MRI showed activation in different parts of the brain. The researchers conclude one could affect meal sizes by manipulating one's mindset. I think this also shows how our thoughts are not just thoughts. They are events and signals in the brain. And due to neuroplasticity, those thoughts shape our brain. Therefore, you really have to watch your mind and cultivate the thoughts that are beneficial to you. Just like Marcus Aurelius, centuries ago, figured out before an MRI, or electricity for that matter, had been invented. Another study found that people with growth mindset had more gray matter volume in their brains. Whether this is the cause or a result of the mindset or a coincidence is not established as far as I can tell. In earlier studies, it has been shown growth mindset is associated with higher connectivity in dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, areas of the brain whose function is error monitoring, as well as ventral striatum involved in reward processing. As such, there's a physioanatomical basis for growth mindset being associated with error monitoring, behavioral adaptation, as well as intrinsically motivated learning. In practice, this means they can use negative feedback, such as knowledge they didn't succeed in something, for a positive purpose, and improve their performance and not get discouraged. Let's stay on the topic of growth mindset for a moment. Remember, a growth mindset means that one holds the belief they can improve through work, such as gain a new skill, while a fixed mindset person believes it is their innate, unchanging talent, which one either has or has not, that determines the outcome. This single difference in belief has been shown to have a multitude of effects on health and achievement in academia and sports. For example, a 2020 meta-analysis found growth mindset to be negatively correlated with psychological distress and positively correlated with treatment value and active coping, meaning there was less anxiety and depression, and if they suffered from those conditions, they were more likely to look for help and actively use different strategies to get better. In education, growth mindset has been shown to improve academic achievement. A study showed that having a growth mindset was enough to lessen the negative effects of coming from a poor background. In the world of sports, a growth mindset is associated with greater exercise frequency, efficiency and value, which in this context refer to how a person thought about going to the gym, whether they'll go despite setbacks and how fit they considered themselves to be. A full episode on the growth and fixed mindset is to come, so consider this just a sneak peek into the subject. Moving on to effects on your health and well-being you would likely notice subjectively without any blood tests. The placebo effects and its evil counterpart, the nocebo effect, have been well known in medicine for over 100 years. In fact, it has now been determined that until the last 100 years or so, practically all medicine was placebo effects. In short, placebo, from Latin meaning I shall be pleasing, refers to a compound that brings a positive effect without any chemicals or procedures that should biochemically affect the underlying condition or disease, such as sugar pills for back pain. Yet about 35% of patients get benefit from such inactive compounds. This is something that still confounds scientists. Before, it was sort of brushed aside, and developers of medicines needed to prove their drug was superior to placebo, and still do, of course. But the effect of placebo itself has become a target of concentrated research. For example, in the 2003 study entitled Conscious Expectation and Unconscious Conditioning in Analgesic, Motor and Hormonal Placebo/Nocebo Responses, the researchers studied placebo effects on 3 different populations and 3 different variables: experienced pain, movement speed in Parkinson's disease, and the excretion of growth hormone and cortisol. In short, what they found was that expectation of effective pain reduction increased the effect of pain medication, or if people were told the medication would in fact increase the pain, their pain tolerance dropped significantly despite being administered pain medication. Intriguingly, the research draws the conclusion that the placebo effect seems to be a phenomenon that can be learned, either consciously or unconsciously. In the first case, an increased expectation is likely to occur after repeated associations of contextual cues with the outcome. In the second case, a mechanism of Pavlovian conditioning is likely to be involved, in which contextual cues and outcomes are unconsciously associated because of their contiguity. So might you be able to learn this effect and gain considerable benefit on your health, pain tolerance and the like, with belief and mindset alone? Now, why do I go on about placebo effects when all these studies require the subject to be deceived for the effects to apply? I doubt most of you would be willing to go through life constantly trying to lie to yourself, in the vein of, ooh, this water I just drank was in fact the tastiest lemonade ever, now I can get all the enjoyment and none of the calories. that would also not be likely to work, at least as long as you think you are lying to yourself. But here's the gist of it. You are already making up all these placebo, or more often nocebo, claims about everything. Just think of the previous study when the researchers told their subjects that they will feel more pain because they had been given a substance heightening pain experience, when they had in fact gotten saline or even pain medication. Their false assumptions caused them to feel more pain. Don't you tell yourself something similar? For example, when you think to yourself how awful it would be to get out of bed, or work on that project, or go exercise. Are you not priming yourself to feel pain you wouldn't have felt otherwise? Could not all these things have been a source of enjoyment and energy instead? Just think about it. Our lives are filled with these kind of nocebo claims, but instead of a well-intentioned researcher, the source is that ever-present voice in our heads that we consider to be ourselves, and don't even think to question its claims. What if we could change it from a bearer of bad news and unwelcome opinions into our personal coach and supporter? We don't have to imagine, because it can be done. It has been done. Ever feel like you might be subconsciously limiting yourself? It can happen, but research has shown that sometimes belief is enough to outdo ourselves, even in areas we would think such a thing to be impossible in. In a fun study named Believing is Seeing, the researchers, led by Ellen Langer, performed 3 tests on their subjects. First, they primed people with the idea that airplane pilots have great vision. Then, with the idea that athletes also have great vision. Then the study subjects were put into the mindsets of pilots and athletes, making use of flight simulators and jumping jacks. And in both cases, some in the primed group improved their eyesight, while almost none in the control group achieved the same. There were just a few people with sub-ideal eyesight in the study, but they seemed to benefit the most. You probably won't be able to fly a plane with no training, with mindset alone, but you just might see a bit better in general, if you believe you do, or that is what this study suggests. Let's return to studying placebo effects. Researcher Alia Cram states in her famous research paper entitled Mindset Matters, Exercise and the Placebo Effect that, and I quote, "The placebo effect is any effect that is not attributed to an actual pharmaceutical drug or remedy, but rather is attributed to the individual's mindset, meaning mindless beliefs and expectations." End quote. Phrasing the issue like this, she is directly attributing the very real effect the placebo can have to the person's mindset. In this paper, she describes how she studied 84 female hotel room attendants who received plenty physical exercise in their daily jobs, yet did not see it as physical exercise per se. The researchers then informed them about how they received more exercise than the Surgeon General recommended at the time, and followed what this change in their understanding of their situation, their expectations and beliefs, did for them physically. Amazingly, she found that their weight, body mass index, waist to hip ratio, and systolic blood pressure all improved enough to gain statistical significance. She assures that there were no lifestyle changes that would explain these results, and they achieved the improvement via change in mindset alone. However, a study by Mark Beauchamp et al., published online in 2011, found that in a population of adolescents, the same did not apply. They theorize this is either because the adolescents differed from the women in the previous study, or that the women in fact increased their efforts without realizing it, leading to the benefits. Nevertheless, that does not change the fact a measurable change took place. There is also a study published in American Journal of Health Behavior in the year 2011, entitled An Investigation of Exercise and the Placebo Effect, which I could not view apart from the abstract, but in their study population of custodial workers, a similar change in mindset lowered blood pressure, but otherwise had no benefits on weight, etc. in 8 weeks. But what if there was no deception involved? That is when we get open-label placebo. In these studies, the researchers inform the study participants that they are getting sugar pills and then compares their results with a group that gets no additional intervention, placebo or otherwise. One would assume this to be ineffective, but a 2021 meta-analysis by Melina von Wernsdorf et al., published in Nature magazine's Scientific Reports, shows that it has proven effective in back pain, cancer-related fatigue, ADHD symptoms, irritable bowel syndrome, and even allergic rhinitis symptoms. The mechanism of this improvement is as unclear, but it shows that one need not be deceived about their treatment for there to be a placebo response. That is, a real abatement of experienced symptoms without any active biomedical treatments targeting cell receptors or the like. By now it should be clear that there is something to be leveraged in the so-called placebo response. But what are the mechanisms driving the effect, and how to benefit from it? This is the subject of the paper by Sean Zion and Alia Cram, published in International Review of Neurobiology in 2018, which is entitled, fittingly enough for this podcast, Mindset Matter, a new framework for harnessing the placebo effect in modern medicine. The authors describe how implicit learning, that is, conditioning, may cause some of the placebo effect. For example, if you receive a medicine with an identifiable taste, when you ingest something that tastes the same, you will get some of the effect, even when the active compound was missing. Another matter influencing the response is patient expectation. If the drug is given without the patient's knowledge, its effect is greatly diminished. Lastly, the influence of mindsets on treatment and response is discussed. For example, a person who believes his pain can be managed might have certain areas of their brain active which are beneficial for, say, the lessening of pain, as compared with a person who believes their disease is an unmitigable catastrophe. The placebo effect shows how great an influence our expectations and mindset can have on all aspects of our lives, including health, achievement, and happiness. Much of this research has come from placebo controls in trials for medicine, but in the recent years the amount of studies into the phenomenon of placebo effect itself has increased. Now that we know what kind of effects can be achieved, or we really don't, because the research and this episode have only scratched the surface. The next step is to figure out how to attain something similar through conscious effort on our part. This is the subject of the next, thus far the most important part of the Mindset Forge. Tools and practices for molding a more fitting, effective mindset to suit your individual needs and ambitions. We have just learned how a change in our beliefs and perceptions can alter us in many ways, from hormone levels to experienced pain. And these studies lasted only hours, at most weeks. Just imagine what kind of change you can create in yourself when you really put your mind to it and stay consistent, following the advice in this podcast. There is hardly any limit on how much we can change or how much we can change the world. After all, a change in belief can turn our worldview upside down. Memento cerebrum formare. The meaning of these words will also be explained, and if understood, can function as a philosophy of life that can help you make the right decision every time in every situation. More of this in the next episode of the Mindset Forge. Stay tuned! Thank you for listening to this episode of the Mindset Forge. I hope you found it informative and the lessons and practices spoken in it relevant to your situation. I also hope you found it as entertaining to listen as I found making it to be. If you found it beneficial, be sure to follow Mindset Forge on Spotify as well as on YouTube, where you can also give us a thumbs up. Also, make sure to check out our Discord server for further discussion, where you can contact me directly. Links in description and channel information. There you can also find the link to my book, which I have self-published on Amazon, called Death Drive. If speculative dystopian near future sci-fi sounds like a cup of tea, getting the book is a great way to support my work as an author. So have a nice day and memento cerebrum formare.